prime thing is you have to win.
Ill intent, violence, physicality, pain. Enough is enough.
Well, we're going to need a new intro now. If you haven't heard yet, Antonio Pierce has been fired. We are coming to you guys live. That's Tashan Reed. That's Vic Tafur. I'm Ted Nguyen. And we said at the end of the last pod, we'll probably talk to you guys soon with an emergency pod. And here we are today. The Raiders made it official. Antonio Pierce has been fired. There seemed to be a little optimism that he might be retained after the Raiders let him have his press conference. I believe it was yesterday. But yeah, news came out today, and he's officially been let go. Any other context you guys want to add to this?
General Manager Tom Telesco is safe. I guess that's the other part of it. Last time that the Raiders made a coaching change, or last couple of times, both the GM and the head coach went. But this time they held on to Tom Telesco and let go of Antonio Pierce. Even though they were hired in the same offseason, technically, Pierce was here before Telesco and his 9-game run as interim coach. And Telesco was hired after AP got hired as head coach. So they were separate. Even though they came in technically in the first offseason, it was pretty much business as usual for Pierce on Monday. He had his typical post, next day press conference. Had his meeting with his players. There was a lot of talking about 2025 and moving forward and what things to do. And speaking as a guy who seemed like he expected to be back in place, as head coach next year, even though he hadn't had I guess an official confirmation in the conversation with Mark Davis, but. Clearly the thought process, Mark Davis thought about it overnight, Sunday, again on Monday, and came into the facility today and had a meeting with Pierce to tell him the news. And so I'm sure he reached out to his advisors and confidants to get their opinions as well. But ultimately, it was his decision, and that's what he landed on.
Matt said ideally all that work is done before Monday. I think you look at the Patriots, they fired their guy after their win on Sunday. They clearly had a path in mind, and now I just think it's another bad look for the Raiders. I mean, not just having the guy go out there, Pierce, and talk to the media, well, who cares the media, but talking to the players afterwards, kind of telling him his vision for next year. He's excited. It's kind of a very positive meeting from what I was told, and players were like, all right, this can work. There are some things to build off this last month or so. But just, again, to have this drawn out for 2 days, and the guys in his office waiting to hear the bad news. And just, I just think, obviously, Tom Brady is a big factor in this, and his talks with Mark, but just have a plan, 4 days ago. Don't wait till the last minute. Don't wait to get you start off behind everybody else. Everybody else has got job interview request out, and everyone else is kind of already moving. And I'm sure they have guys in mind, but those guys probably are already talking to other teams. So again, just we've talked about this. It's going to be the 6th coach, and Mark Davis is 13 years, and I just don't know. If he's learned any lessons or if he knows what he's doing, but. Clearly, he decided Pierce wasn't his guy, and I'm sure he got some help with that decision, and here we are.
Yeah, to me, looking at what happened, I think it seemed like Mark was probably undecided. Maybe he was leaning one way or the other, but for him to let, like you said, for him to let Antonio Pierce talk to the players and talk about his vision, and for him to do that press conference, it seemed like maybe his mind wasn't totally made yet until he talked to his confidants, and Adam Schefter reported that Tom Brady is going to be involved in or heavily involved in the process of hiring a new head coach. So I assume maybe Brady is part of that group that talked to him about possibly firing Antonio Pierce.
Yeah, we've written that for months, that Brady's going to be involved, and clearly he will. I'm not saying that Mark knew and let him go out there and be a scam. I'm just saying that, obviously he was still deciding. I think some people in the office building were shocked today when Pierce was gone. I don't think everyone saw what's coming. I think people, if you asked, like Tashan and I over the last week or so, you heard some things like, yeah, he's going to stay. A couple days later, well, no, it definitely was a wavering opinion. Everyone kind of waiting on Mark to kind of make his mind up. So I'm just saying, I get that, and that's fine, be deliberate, but there's no reason to do that the last 2 days as opposed to the last, 2 weeks. I just think that you have to have if you really are gonna hire or fire a coach based on if he beats the Chargers in the Week 18 game. That's a flawed process.
Yeah, and Ted, I know you talked about that. You thought that was a bad process if that's the case, and it seems like that's what it was. Because I mean, there was some legitimate deliberation from Mark Davis on what he should do, and the only reason that would be the case is if he hadn't made up his mind until that Chargers game. So, as wild as it sounds, it came down to that for Antonio Pierce, and ultimately, it wasn't enough for him to keep his job. But it wasn't a thing where clearly they didn't have their mind made up. Otherwise, he would have been fired on Sunday or at the worst Monday morning.
Yeah, and if we were to give the benefit of the doubt to Mark Davis, maybe he was already leaning heavy one way, but he just wasn't totally decided yet and wanted to reflect on everything and maybe not just one game. Hopefully that's the case. Um, but yeah, I mean, ultimately he made that decision, and Antonio Pierce was fired. I mean, if you've followed us on this podcast, I thought it was the right decision. Um, but why do you guys think that Tom Telesco kept his job? I mean, I think he had a pretty strong draft. Free agents didn't all work out, obviously, but um, I mean, yeah, he didn't choose Antonio Pierce like you mentioned. He was hired after Antonio Pierce was hired. Like, what do you guys think about Tom Telesco?
I think it was a draft class. I think especially this team organization has not drafted well in a long time. So I think if you're Mark Davis, I'm sure you're like, oh hey, we got some guys this year. We got some guys definitely are foundation pieces. So that's a big part of it. I think he said, I think he told Deshaun this back in Atlanta, that he's going to evaluate these guys separately. So I think if you're out putting this year on someone, and obviously he's not happy with the way it turned out, he puts it on Pierce. I think Telesco was hired afterwards, after Antonio was, and he definitely was in charge, and he made some moves. Got Christian Wilkins, and we mentioned the draft class. But I think if you are going to question the direction of some of the things that happened this year, I can see where he would put that on Antonio and Tom, and also to be a smartass. Now at least he has a guy who can be a scapegoat for next year. Telesco can be a scapegoat for next year when things don't work out. So I mean, it's just a weird way of doing things. But yeah, I think Tom did a good job this year. So I think Uh, I'm curious about how that's worked with him and Tom Brady, but that's another story for another day.
Yeah, I mean, like really the only thing that you can knock Telesco too seriously for this year would be, how he handled the quarterback situation. Obviously, that's the most important position in football, and so that's a big thing. But yeah, he whiffed pretty badly on that Gardner Minshew signing, giving him 2 years, $25 million. I'm not saying that they shouldn't have signed a veteran stopgap type of quarterback, but we've seen others that were way cheaper than him perform way better than him this season. I mean, Justin Fields was better than him, Russell Wilson, Sam Darnold. The list goes on. And so even if you weren't going to draft a rookie, they signed the wrong veteran stopgap. That was pretty clear because Minshew was terrible this year. And that's not an insignificant amount of money, $25 million. And so, I don't really knock them too much for not getting a quarterback in the first round. I mean, those top three teams were never going to trade down, really. You could critique them for not trading up for one of the other three quarterbacks, JJ McCarthy, Michael Penix, and Bo Nix. I mean, Nix has been offensive rookie of the year candidate, and he was right there one spot ahead of them, so they could have maybe traded up and tried to get him. Or, we didn't really get to see McCarthy or Penix play all that much this year, so they're less of a full evaluation on them. But Nix looks like at least a solid starting quarterback moving forward. And, if the player they end up getting, Brock Bowers, with all that being said, is probably going to be an all-pro as a rookie. So I can't really knock a guy for drafting an all-pro with his first-round pick. But the Raiders still stunk this year, partly because they didn't have a quarterback. And I'm not saying that Sam Darnold would have had the same year he's having with the Vikings with the Raiders, or even Russell Wilson would be having the same year he's had with the Steelers. But the fact remains that they made the wrong move at quarterback this offseason, and that's something that's not on Pierce because Telesco has personnel power, and that was ultimately his decision. And so that's really the only thing you can knock Telesco for this year, I would say. But I think the draft class and some of the other moves that he made, outweigh that. Signing Christian Wilkins, I know he only played 5 games, but it was fluke injuries happen. And then also trading Devontae Adams and getting the 3rd round pick for him. That's something that they can use this year to help improve the team.
Yeah, I mean, I think whoever made the decision to start Gardner Minshew over Aiden O'Connell, that was a bad decision. I mean, they would have won a couple more games probably with Aiden over Gardner. I don't care what you guys say.
I mean, okay, you're a 6-win team instead of a 4-win team. It doesn't
I
fucking
know,
matter.
but
You still
it
suck.
still makes a difference. the end of the
like
day.
it did. Like they still
But
suck either way. Like Aiden O'Connell's not this
yeah, but I mean,
great quarterback. Yeah.
at the end of the day, whoever made that decision should not be making those decisions. But anyways,
Oh, that's new. It is all hindsight. I think yesterday Antonio mentioned he would have gone with Gardner. I mean, go with Aiden in retrospect. But
it's not
again,
hindsight because I pushed it. No, just kidding.
I'm just saying. I mean, I have no any idea that you're gonna get this version of Gardner Minshew. I mean, he was terrible, and he hasn't been terrible his NFL career. This is by far the worst version of him. So, and he still beat out. I mean, I don't know if he beat out, but you can say Aiden didn't beat him out in training camp, which it would have been easier for everyone if he had. So, I agree with Tashan. Like, best case scenario, they win 1 or 2 more games. I mean, I'll tell you what. I mean, another thing, if people are forgetting, is like that first part of the schedule was all those teams with great pass rushes. I mean, Andrew O'Connell probably gets killed in those games, and probably he's out week 3 anyway. So I think that was a big part of the decision factor. Like, this guy can move, this guy can't. I mean, so I just think, again, hindsight's 2020. Either way, there was not. Neither guy's an answer for this team. So I think, like,
Yeah.
one of his last words, Antonio said, was, "It's a glaring need," and it is. I mean, for sure.
Yeah, this roster, I mean, it's not a deep roster. We knew that. And anytime you have 5 starters go out on defense, Maxx Crosby, Christian Wilkins, Malcolm Kuntz, Marcus Evans, Jacorian Bennett, like, this was not going to be a successful year for the Raiders. Like, it just wasn't going. I mean, obviously, you can't predict injuries. You didn't know that the defense was going to be decimated in that way. But between that, the running back room not being any good, the offensive line having so many issues, Devontae Adams asking out for a trade, like, maybe they're a 6-win team instead of a 4-win team, but I don't think it makes that much of a difference altogether. But all that to say, just in terms of Telesco, I just think there was enough there for him to make it to year 2. But like Vic said, if they can't figure out this quarterback plan moving forward, like, we're going to be talking about Tom Telesco next offseason, because that's how this league goes.
Yeah, I mean, but the thing is, any decision that costs you 2 games is not a good decision. But regardless, I think
Ted, we'd be with you if it was 8 wins versus 10 wins, but it's 4 versus 6.
no,
Like,
I feel like you guys
this
are
is a
just.
lost season.
I feel like you guys are just excusing every bad decision because it's a bad
No,
season,
we're not
and like
excusing it.
it
I
doesn't
mean,
matter.
No, we're
But
just saying that Aiden O'Connell's not that good. He's a below average, like low
that's
level
yeah, but he's
starter,
still.
or like
we
a
just
high level backup.
I
He
think he's
acting like
way
he's
better than
Tom
Gardner Minshew.
Brady or something.
And
That's different.
regardless, the fact that the offensive line was bad was more reason to start Aiden O'Connell because he got rid of the ball faster. Gardner Minshew held on to the ball, and he was
no,
a good athlete, so he didn't get
Also,
away from pass
did you watch
rushers.
Aiden O'Connell play? Like,
Um,
did we not see the same guy the last few weeks? That
okay,
like,
let's move on. Let's move on. I don't want to get into a whole Aiden
let's
O'Connell
move
debate. We
on.
could do
Let's
that
move.
on another podcast.
Yeah, fans are tired
Um,
of our act. Let's move on.
but
nice.
just to put a nail in the coffin or whatever, it Antonio Pierce, CEO, head coach. Two things you got to do as a CEO, head coach. You have to be an ace game management guy. He was awful, possibly the worst game management coach in the league if it wasn't for Matt Eberflus. And just to recap some decisions, punting when they were down against the Chargers in Week 1, that was seen as one of the worst decisions, one of the worst coaching decisions in a long time analytically. And then at the end of the Chiefs game, they had a chance to win that game. Just weird timeout management. The whole fumble snap thing could have been avoided if they just let the clock run instead of trying that weird throwaway play. But game management was terrible, and you just can't have that. And maybe you could have that excuse that he was a rookie coach and he was getting better if it wasn't god awful and it didn't stay the same the whole time, and it stayed the same the whole time. So that couldn't happen. And as a CEO, head coach, you have to be able to hire. And he completely blew the Luke Getsy hire. I know he wanted Cliff Kingsbury, and I have my opinions about Cliff Kingsbury as well, but he ended up hiring Luke Getsy, and facts are facts. That's who he ended up with. Ended up being a terrible hire, got fired, and if Patrick Graham left, we don't know how the defense is going to be. Who is he going to hire as defensive coordinator? He has no experience in NFL as a defensive coordinator, so it was just really hard to see where the value of Antonio Pierce is as a CEO, head coach, motivator. But there's just no tangent value he brings as a head coach to me.
I mean, I think he deserves. I mean, deserves the wrong word, but I think you could argue that giving another year to grow into the role. I mean, this team is not going to contend this year. It was never going to be in the playoff race, so it could be a learning. And plus, the injuries you mentioned. I just think that the thing you talked about, the game management and the CEO stuff and the coaching staff. I mean, obviously those are issues, but those are things you can learn from and grow from. And other guys in the league have chances to do that, and other guys get more than 1 year. So I think it's a little bit of a quick hook, I think, based when you look at all the different things that happened. I mean, the Devontae Adams thing we haven't talked about yet, that was a huge deal this year, and that kind of cut us off at the knees, especially talking about Luke Getsy and Antonio Pierce. That was a big deal. I mean, they lost their best player in offense, I mean, mentally probably week 1 or 2, or physically week 4. So I just think that's a big factor, which people are kind of glossing over. So I get the issues with Antonio. I just think that for a team that's had so many different changes, so many different coaches, so many different, plans and regimes. And I mean, a year ago, fans were chanting his name. The owner was saying this guy's the best guy ever. I don't know why that's like all of a sudden after 1 year you pull the plug and don't give it a chance to see where it goes.
Yeah, I think with the game management stuff, like it didn't improve this season, but I mean, like you kind of knew that he was going to have some growing pains as an inexperienced coach, like just a coach period, let alone a head coach. Like he's only been coaching for 10 years, 4 at the high school level, 4 in college, and then 2 in the NFL. And you got to figure out how to do that shit by experience. And, we didn't see growth this season, but, who's to say that he couldn't have had growth moving forward? But I do think, that coaching staff element was one of the biggest factors because, we know that Antonio Pierce is on a short-term deal. And if you are an up-and-coming offensive coordinator candidate, why would you come here after he fired his previous offense coordinator after 9 games and you don't, and he's, kind of on thin ice as a head coach? Like, what if you come here and you guys suck again and get fired and now your career's off the rails? And same thing for a defensive coordinator. And so I think that probably put Pierce in a tough situation when you're meeting with Mark Davis and he has, what's your plan going forward at coordinator? I mean, you could throw some names out there, but like how realistic is it that those guys would actually want to come here given the situation? And so, it wasn't completely Pierce's fault. I think the quarterback situation, as we mentioned, is mostly on Telesco. I think the defensive injuries, like, it's not really in his control. The Kingsbury thing, you can kind of put blame on both sides, but NFL isn't always fair, and Mark Davis couldn't evaluate this based off of what was fair to Pierce. He had to evaluate what's best for the Raiders moving forward. And, however you got here, if you got to the point where Pierce wasn't going to be able to put together a coherent staff for next year and your quarterback situation's iffy, and you think that a new head coach could potentially change at least one of those factors, then you have to go ahead and do it. And also, given Pierce is on that short-term deal, it wasn't like, it's not like John Gruden's situation where Mark Davis would have had to eat 9 years of a $100 million contract or something like that to do it. We don't know the exact details, but it wasn't much money in the grand scheme of things that, Mark Davis had to eat in order to move on from Pierce. And so all that factor in, I understand how he moved on, but I also could have understood it if he kept him. I think it could have went both ways, but, this is the movie made and we'll see how it goes from here.
I think there's 2 parts to this. I think obviously, part of it is you're letting Pierce go, but now what do they do? Who are they bringing in next? Did Brady promise some big names might be interested? Like, so to me, I can't really analyze this move in totality, so I know who's coming in to talk, who they're going to hire. So if I say they went away from Pierce because they got this guy, okay, that makes sense. So it's hard. I mean, right now we're in the middle of it, so we can't really like stand back and look at the big picture. But let's see who they bring in to talk to, who the candidates are, who Brady has some pull with, what's next, what's the vision. Let me see the vision now because it's different. I mean, in the past, I would rip Mark Davis and stuff because he was the guy, but now he said, hey, I'm going to leave on Tom Brady. Tom Brady's going to come in here at some point. He'll be in charge. You're starting to see some of that pull right now. So I'll wait and see who they bring in, who they hire. Then we can really analyze if it was the right move to go on from Pierce and bring the new guy in.
Yeah, that's a great point too that I was going to bring up. A lot of the times when you see a franchise just go through the revolving door of leadership, the one constant that remains is the owner. If you have a bad owner, you have bad ownership, your team's going to be bad. It's just hard to be good when you have a bad owner. And Mark Davis just has not had a good track record since he's taken over. I mean, he's made money. He's gone to Vegas. The team has gone up in value. He put some money in his pocket. But I do give him credit though, because I think he saw that he is a little bit over his head, and he gave he wanted to bring Brady in. He sold part of the Raiders to Brady to at a discount price. I think because He wants to have somebody actually that knows football help him on these things. And I think Brady, is going to be a big part of hiring this new coach. So I don't know if it's going to work out. And I talk about process a lot, and I think this is part of a good process. We'll see how it works, though.
Yeah, and I mean, even before AP got hired, talked to Mark Davis back then, and he, expressed essentially wanting to hire sort of a president of football operations to oversee things and fill in that sort of next level of football knowledge that he knew that he didn't have. And the vision always seemed to be for Tom Brady to basically be that figure. And I know he can't formally have that role due to NFL rules, but that's sort of how we've been describing his role. The expectation is for him to basically be a high level advisor. But it won't just be him. We also know that Richard Seymour, who's a minority owner now, was involved in the hiring process last year. And the panel is, we don't know what the hiring panel is going to be yet, but it's most likely going to consist of, Mark Davis, Tom Brady, Richard Seymour, Sandra Douglas Morgan, team president, and then Larry Delson, one of the board members, is usually involved as well. We'll see if anybody else is involved in the hiring panel, but that's probably going to be the core group moving forward. And it seems like, Davis is still going to be his final decision. Like, he's a controlling owner, but it seems like he's going to be leaning a little bit harder on, his advisors than maybe he's done in the past. But that doesn't always pan out. I mean, a couple of searches ago, Ken Herrock pretty much led up that search that led them to Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler, and we saw how that went. So different doesn't always mean better. I know that Tom Brady was a great player and Richard Seymour was as well, but we'll see if they're any better at picking head coaches than Mark Davis is. So,
I mean, the bar is low. I mean, the process has to get better than it was. I mean, they went from not even asking Josh McDaniels about his Denver time, like, so who cares for the Broncos? So we're focused on. So clearly the process can't get worse than it has been. So you have hope that Tom can add to that. And so, I mean, last year Antonio Pierce sat in on Telesco's interview. So it's a weird deal, and hopefully they get some positive direction in that manner.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing is Brady. He knows ball, so he's going to be able to pick the whoever the coaching candidate's brain about that, and like what's Mark Davis going to do in a coaching interview if he's trying to see if a coach knows ball? Like Brady's going to at least add that, and Seymour is going to probably add that. So, I mean, how do you guys envision this going? Like, do you think it's going to be Mark maybe finding a few guys or finding some candidates and then just wheeling Brady and Seymour into the interviews? Like, how do you think this process is going to go?
Like I mentioned, I hope, I'm guessing, I think that's what I've heard, that Brady has some guys in mind. And I mean, I think everyone talks about Mike Vrabel, but I think he's already gone. I think he's going to be the Patriots' new coach. I think that's a done deal. So look at guys like who has ties with maybe Brian Flores. I mean, we had a story today that we had 10 guys, Tashan, and so there's a lot of guys, and I think you'll bring a bunch of them in. And I think, talking to as many guys as you can doesn't hurt. So I think, but I hope Brady has a short list in mind, and you go from there. And I wouldn't say it's a great aspiring list of guys this year, but they're guys. So I think it depends which way you want to go with this. You want to go with the offensive guy, young guy, like this was a trend for a while. You want to go with someone with some experience. I mean, I haven't heard Pete Carroll's name today, which I think is kind of ridiculous. But I mean, again, there's different ways you can go, and I think we'll see the plan shortly.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the exact process of who's identifying the candidates and all that, we don't quite have all those details yet. But among the candidates out there, I mean, like Vic said, we had a story of 10 guys. It's not saying these are only guys, but the 10 guys we went with were Ben Johnson, Mike Vrabel, John Gruden, Liam Cohen, Jesse Minter, Aaron Glenn, Steve Spagnuolo, Brian Flores, Todd Monken, and Joe Brady. Like you mentioned, there's other guys. There's Pete Carroll. There's Anthony Weaver, the Dolphins defensive coordinator. There's a number of other guys out there, but can't list every single head coaching candidate in the world. Otherwise, it'd be a 4,000 word story. But it'd be interesting to see. Like, since they are a team in need of a quarterback, I think a lot of people automatically think they should hire whoever the hot offensive coordinator is. But again, like, if you are one of those offensive coordinators, like, why would you want to come to a place where there's not a clear path to a quarterback? If you're a Ben Johnson, for example, like, I have to imagine he has better options than that. And there's nothing wrong with hiring a defensive-minded head coach or a CEO-style head coach. They can still hire, like, a good offensive coordinator. Like, that's literally what Dan Campbell did with the Lions. I don't think everybody knows who Ben Johnson is now, but I don't think really that many people knew who he was before he got that job. And He's been there for a few years, and the Lions have had a ton of success. And so you don't necessarily have to hire an offensive play caller just to make a good head coaching hire. But there's plenty of other good head coaches in the league, and so we'll see how this all pans out. But there's some good candidates out there for sure.
Yeah, I think at first I thought Vrabel would be pretty much gone to the Patriots, but Ben Johnson did express some interest in the Patriots job because it's a pretty hot job. I mean, to get the chance to coach Drake May, who I thought was if it wasn't for Jaden Daniels, I thought he was better than Bo Nix if you watch some of his film. But yeah, I don't think the Raiders will have a chance at Ben Johnson. He's going to be the hottest coaching candidate. He's calling the shots basically in these interviews. I just have a hard time seeing Ben Johnson have any interest in this job. But if he does end up getting a Patriots job, that does open up Vrabel. I mean,
The Patriots.
no
Patriots.
one
I
can
mean,
say for sure, but
they interviewed both of the. I know we're not supposed to say this, but like they interviewed the 2 black head coaching candidates today, and Vrabel's coming in on Thursday. Like we can kind of see where the Patriots thing is going. You know what I mean? So I think Vrabel's pretty much off the board.
He's got the history there. They got a lot of salary cap space. They got the young quarterback ready in place, and I just think that's for him. It's a perfect job for him. I can't imagine why he wouldn't want that job.
Shit, they brought him in halfway through last season, winding down them right when the coach is there, man. So.
Yeah, I mean, I like Vrabel, but he has a great agent. So because like somehow he became a fired head coach that couldn't get a job last year, and now he's the hottest coaching candidate on the beat besides Ben Johnson right now. So
Well, part of that is when the NFL, when you fire 7 coaches a year for 25 years, the list of guys that's available is not a great list. I mean, you run through it so many times, you always have no patience, and they have so much money that all of a sudden it's all a bunch of retreads and the guys who don't know. So I think that's why this list this year is like, Vrabel and Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn, and I mean, all of a sudden now, Pete Carroll and John Gruden. So I just like if you see where there's not like a great list of candidates, I don't think. I mean, obviously you can find the right guy, and interviews go certain ways, and you can find magic. But I mean, I would say the reason Vrabel's the star of the show is because the rest of the show is it's not great.
Yeah, I mean, I think Vrabel would make a good head coach for sure, and he should definitely be one of the top candidates. But like the way people are talking about him, it's just a little surprising to me. But yeah, other candidates like you guys mentioned, Pete Carroll. That's a very surprising name too to me. He just kind of flamed out in Seattle. Seattle gave him so many years to get the thing back on track, and he was never able to get Seattle back on track. The defense fell off worse in the league for I think worst run defense in the league for 3 years, and not even just worse. Like they were just getting gashed. I mean, I think Josh Jacobs ran for like 200 on them 1 year. So it just seemed like he kind of didn't modernize himself to the game, and just made the wrong hires, including Shane Waldron, who got fired by the Bears too. But great culture guy, very old, so I don't know if that's the best choice.
But he's in great shape, man. He'll kick your ass. So
It's true.
Oh, yeah.
But when's the cliff coming?
He'll kick my ass too. How about that? There you go. I'm not picking on Ted. People will say, "Oh, you're picking on Ted." No, I'm not picking on Ted. It's all love.
Yeah, no, I don't feel that way. I just feel oppressed by you two. No, I'm just kidding. um, I mean, I like Liam Cohen a lot. And Brady just got a firsthand look at Liam Cohen. He was
That's a good
calling
point.
the Buccaneers game. I'm just really impressed by what he did with the Buccaneers, especially with the injuries they dealt with, getting that run game fixed, and getting Baker Mayfield to look like a borderline top 10 quarterback. And Dave Canales kind of started that last year.
Yeah. I think like that kind of ship was already rolling a little bit with Canales kind of getting that going last year. But as long as if you're not going to be in the Ben Johnson bucket, I would assume that Liam Cohen's probably the next hottest offensive coordinator name out there. So it makes sense to at least bring him in for an interview. Obviously, there's more components to being a good head coach. Like maybe he's terrible with managing people and has no idea who he would hire on the staff and all that. Like I don't know. I don't know the guy well enough to speak to that, but he's definitely should be on the list of guys that you would at least bring in for an interview. Or since they're in the playoffs, I guess it would have to be virtual because of the new rules. So
And you can say you're so far behind the other three teams in your division now. I mean, it's a huge gap now between the other three teams in terms of the coaching and the quarterbacks. You're so far behind. You definitely could say, might as well just get a young coach, get a young quarterback, pair them together, and just look down the road quite a ways and still we'll get there in 2 or 3 years. I think that might be the way to go because I think, like I said, it's not. I think they can turn this around quickly. It seems to be not realistic.
Yeah, I mean, they've been trying this kind of weird, like between a rebuild and between an all-in type of thing for a few years now, and it's just been disastrous. So they got to just stick with the rebuild and find players that are going to be on this team long term and not flashy players, build through the trenches. Um, yeah, and another candidate to consider, Brian Flores, is going to be a hot name too. Brian Flores obviously has really transformed that Vikings defense. It's not working with a ton of blue chip talent, but that defense consistently is one of the best week in and week out. But does the Brian Flores experience with Tua kind of scare you guys, especially if the Raiders do decide they want to get a young quarterback?
I mean, I think it could give them some cause for pause just because of kind of, just Brian Flores having some of those interpersonal issues that he had with players, and it also sounded like the front office in Miami, like sounds kind of Josh McDaniels-y, a little bit. So I think there would be some questions about making sure that he's learned from that experience and has grown, which is fair to ask, I would say. And then also when it comes to, we were talking about this with Pierce, but his ability to put together the coaching staff. I can't remember what year it was, but I remember one year the Dolphins had that weird like co-offensive coordinator shit that they had going on down there. So like making sure that he's not going to do something like that again. I think
Yeah,
that would
they
be
also had
pretty.
Ryan Fitzpatrick, like, play closer,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
which I've
He
never
was really
seen
good against the
in the NFL
Raiders.
before, but that was
They
pretty
figured
funny.
it out when they played the Raiders, that's for sure. But no, yeah, but I think those are two valid points that would come up is, how has he improved with the interpersonal skills and then also his ability to hire a coaching staff. But if he has grown in those areas, which is possible, like people can grow and change, I think he'd be a pretty strong candidate. And obviously he also knows Tom Brady pretty well.
Yeah, I think if Todd vouches for him, I think Marcus be okay. He's cool. He's I mean, so I think it all depends on Brady.
Yeah.
Hey, you hired Patrick Graham, so that's a good hire.
Yeah.
Um, hey, and maybe he keeps Patrick Graham if he does come in.
Yeah, see, to me it makes no sense because you're Patrick Graham. He's interviewing for jobs right now. I think head coaching job in Jacksonville, I think, and DC and with the Bengals, if I'm not mistaken. But you're Patrick Graham. He wants to be a head coach. So being a D coordinator under Brian Flores, you would get no shine. All the credit would go to Brian. I think you would lose. And I don't know how you would. I think that's a bad move for Patrick.
Yep, I would agree.
I think, and the big thing will be Maxx Crosby. I mean, do you trade Maxx Crosby now? I mean, that's a guy, he wants a new contract. Does that make sense at this point where you're as a franchise? I think he wouldn't mind probably a move at this point. So that's probably one of the bigger things on this offseason on the menu is it time to move on from Maxx?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure I don't think we talked about it, but he has some interesting comments today on the podcast, Sirius XM podcast he has before the AP news came out. He basically said, worrying about the coaching staff isn't my job, which is a pretty strong 180 from his stance a year ago where he basically was going to request a trade if AP didn't get the job. So it's clear his stance, has changed. And he had a thing a couple weeks ago where he said he wanted a new deal. So I think it's hard to say without knowing who the next head coach is going to be. Like maybe it's somebody that Maxx Crosby loves and wants to play for. Maybe it's not. I think it'll also depend on what they do at quarterback. And so there's really no pressure for him to jump out right now, tomorrow, and be like, all right, I want out of here since you guys fired AP. Like I would imagine he's going to sit back, watch how the offseason plays out, and then see what he wants to do from there. But from a team perspective, I think, Tom Telesco and whoever the next head coach is going to be, they're going to want to keep Maxx Crosby on their team. So I'm sure, if it's restructuring his deal to give him a raise or whatever it might be, I would imagine that they would want to explore that pathway before they just ship him out of here for draft picks or whatever they get.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think Crosby is going to be a player that's going to play at a high level for a long time. So I think he would be able to withstand a rebuild and still be good. And just as far as the culture and the leadership, I think he's a guy that you would want to keep in the building unless you get some monstrous offer. But I mean, we saw what the Raiders did with the capital they got for Khalil Mack. Not much.
It's a new
And Khalil
regime,
Mack is
man.
still playing
New
at a high
regime.
level. It's true. But to me, I think Crosby's a guy you just want to keep in the building.
Yeah, I wouldn't be trading him unless you. We know we talked about this. I literally at least one first, maybe two, but I wouldn't be in a rush to trade Maxx Crosby.
Yeah. All right. That's all we have for you guys today. It's about an hour. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Appreciate the tips. We will probably talk to you guys pretty soon if something else happens, if the Raiders hire a new head coach. But we'll get into some draft content soon, and we'll announce that on Twitter. Make sure you guys like, subscribe on YouTube, and leave a comment and subscribe wherever you guys get your podcasts. We'll talk to you guys soon.
All right, y'all. Peace.
Hasta la vista.